Well, if it feels like America has grown more divided, it's because it has. A new survey shows Republicans and Democrats view each other negatively, and more so since the 2016 election. Republicans who give Democrats a negative rating has risen 14 points overall, describing Democrats as closed-minded, unpatriotic, and immoral. The trend is similar for Democrats, 75% of whom describe the GOP as closed-minded. They also call them immoral and unintelligent. One thing on which partisans see eye to eye, however, their inability to agree on basic facts. Well, as you can imagine, in that climate, engaging in tough conversations with people of differing political views isn't always easy. But the authors of the book, I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening, say we should be doing just that.
Yeah, I like the title. Recently, I sat down with Beth Silvers and Sarah Stewart Holland to talk about how to talk about those difficult conversations. The tagline of your book is a guide to grace-filled political conversations. Those seem to be lacking in today's culture. Beth, what does a grace-filled conversation, political conversation, look like today?
We talked a lot about whether we wanted to use the word grace because it's a word that we use among ourselves all the time at Fancy Politics. And a lot of people said, why don't you just talk about civility? And we realized we're talking about something deeper than civility. This is not just let's be nice and kind in these conversations. Sometimes grace requires a really firm stance. What we wanted to convey with grace-filled political conversations are conversations that connect you to your values, so that we make sure no matter what we're talking about, how contentious it gets, we are fundamentally operating out of a sense of our most treasured values.
So it's not about backing off your values, but having an understanding of the other person's values?
Well, you know, sometimes the conversation is going to have to happen before you can understand the person's values. But what we really want to push people to do is represent their values not just in their policy positions, but how they engage about those policy positions, how you treat the other person, how you talk about the other person. Those reflect your values as well.
What are some very practical tips you could give people?
The first thing we want people to remember is that the goal is not to emerge from the Thanksgiving table with draft legislation. We come together and connect over politics because they do offer us spaces to explore how we live in community with each other, and that's relevant to our families. So we want people to have these conversations, but we just want them to understand the goal isn't to convince anyone. You don't need to walk away all agreeing on who you're going to vote for. It should be a curious exploration, especially when you've grown up in the same house with someone who sees things so differently than you. It's great to say, I wonder how this happened. You know, we have so much in common in our background. Why do you think we see this so differently?
So do you agree or disagree with this statement? Let's agree to disagree and move on.
I hate that statement. I hate that sound because it feels like it's shutting down the conversation. Beth was saying this just the other day. The reason I think we both have such strong reactions is because it sounds like we're done here. We're not going to talk about this. And that's the opposite of what we want. What we want people to do is say, okay, I think maybe it's become too heated right now, but I care about what you think. And I want to continue this conversation later. I want to continue to talk about the issues in our countries that matter, the values that are important to us, and maybe even become better versed in why we disagree, or maybe even find some agreement.
Why do you think the concept of grace is such a hard concept in today's culture? There seems to be so little of it.
Every message that we get is you're a consumer of what's in front of you. Especially through social media, we're trained to give things a thumbs up or a thumbs down immediately. And grace asks us to hold a lot of room around everything. Even if I disagree, you're still a person I value and respect in my life. Even if I think this policy position is wrong, I want to hear it out and see what I can learn from it. Grace has that element of we belong. And nothing else around us enforces that sense that things belong, even if we don't love them.
So what about the really sticky issues that we are talking about today? You know, whether it's gun violence or abortion or really polarizing issues. How do people navigate those conversations?
Sometimes it's best to approach the conversation like a reporter, like somebody who's just curious to learn, to think, where did you get that information from? Is there anything I could say that would help you see this issue differently? Or sometimes what I like to do is go really, really far out. How does this play historically? Is this different than how somebody 100 years ago would have talked about it? Just giving some bigger, wider perspective to the issues and not see it as just a debate where we have to convince one another.